Hello everyone, welcome to our audiobook channel. If you enjoy this story or want to hear more exciting content, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your feedback helps us improve and bring even more captivating stories. Enjoy listening. Chapter 4: Fall and Ascension. It was a night like all the others since he had quit his job. Derek would wear one of his new suits and wander off the city, to see what would it kill him first, the cancer or a random crazy head. Once reached exhaustion or simply boredom, he would then take a cab and get back home. Derek was walking with quick strides, high on his medications when he saw him. Chris Wainwright. He was holding a bottle of liquor, ill-hidden inside a paper bag, from which he would drink in big gulps. Chris was talking and laughing loudly with a teen girl that was showing a lot of skin. She was holding a joint, taking big puffs, until they traded and got into a car. It was a custom-painted muscle car. Not the same Camaro that Chris had used to kill Carl, it was even bigger and more expensive. In that moment, Derek wanted to puke blood. How could he possibly have forgotten about that little B****? Had his cancer really screwed up his brain so bad to be willing to let such a loose end slip? The tires screeched and the car started suddenly, almost running over a woman that was crossing the road. The skimpily dressed girl rolled down the window, yelling insults at the woman that was still frozen in fear. Derek could almost hear that couple of idiots laughing. Gritting his teeth, he called a cab and started to plan his final act. First, he started to stalk Chris on all the social networks, learning all his routines and habits. Then Derek began to follow him, and planted a GPS tracker under the Camaro to always know his exact location. Simply skimming through Chris' chirper, he found at least 50 violations of the parole deal. While following him, Derek took many photos of Chris abusing alcohol and drugs. But Derek had no intention to submit the evidence to the police. What could he possibly gain from that? Chris would just get another slap on the wrist and then start being more careful. Derek had not the luxury of time, nor the willingness of doing what the so-called justice system was supposed to. Less than a week later, by checking Chris' Bookface page, Derek learned of a rave he would participate to. Derek double-checked his equipment and jumped into his new car, a black 1967 Chevrolet Impala. The best car to hunt monsters with. The rave was secret, hence it would take place in some rundown abandoned location. Derek followed Chris closely, and as soon they were away from traffic cams he ran into the Camaro from the side, forcing Chris to halt. As soon as Chris stepped down of the car, Derek took him down with a stun gun, and then quickly proceeded to check if the Camaro had more passengers. It seemed to be his lucky night. Chris was driving alone. Derek searched him and crushed every electronic device he could find, Bitfit, smartphone, even Chris' keychain. Derek tied him hands and feet and ball-gagged him. Then he destroyed his own smartphone and the GPS tracker, tossing everything outside the road. Then he moved Chris in the trunk of the Impala, headed toward a party only for the two of them. Derek drove to an abandoned warehouse in the old industrial area. He had already got rid of the lock and chain that kept the big metallic doors closed, replacing them with his own. Inside the warehouse there were only 2 chairs, both bolted to the ground, a bucket, and several water tanks. Derek opened the trunk, discovering that Chris had regained his senses, so he tossed him again. Then he took Chris to a chair and started tightly binding his arms and legs to it. Then Derek splashed him with a bucket of water, forcing him to regain focus. "Hello, Chris. My name is Derek Esposito, and you killed my brother. We need to talk." Chris tried getting out of the restraints, and while commending his efforts, Derek violently hit him in the groin with a nightstick. The pain paralyzed him. "Where was I? Oh, yes. The last time we saw each other was during your farce trial. Do you remember me?" Chris' panting intensified. "Good. Let's get straight to business." Derek took 2 digital timers out of the car, setting the first to 30 minutes and the second to 2 hours, 44 minutes and 16 seconds. Then, he pulled out a gun and double-tapped Chris' liver. His scream was muffled by the gag ball, but the shots echoed loudly in the empty warehouse. Derek started both timers simultaneously and came in close, checking the blood. It was dense and black, a clear indicator of a crushed liver. Now, before the real pain settles in, I need you to take a good look to the timers, they are really important. Chris was crying and screaming, so Derek had to splash him again and pull him by hair to get his attention. The first timer marks how much time you have left. After it rings, even if someone should miraculously break through that door and rescue you, you would be dead anyway. You have only so much time until your system gets flooded by toxins unfiltered by the liver, to the point that no transplant can save you. The second timer is a surprise. We'll get to it in time. For now, your only task is to stay awake and savor every moment of pain, like Carl did. The time flew, Chris kept screaming through the gag ball, and soon the fist timer rang. Chris started sobbing even stronger, sometimes stopping only because overwhelmed by the constantly rising pain. Derek would speak to him no longer, he would just pace back and forth, occasionally checking the second timer. Every time Chris fainted, Derek would splash him and force him to stay awake before refilling the bucket. When the second timer rang, Derek finally spoke again. I have bad news and I have good news. The bad news is that I lied before. I thoroughly researched liver injuries, and with such crushed liver you had no hope to begin with. Even if I had shot you in front of the best hospital in the USA, unless they had a compatible liver at hand, you would have died. I wanted to give you false hope, as happened to my brother while waiting for help. The good news is that you just suffered as long as Carl did. I may be many things, unrelenting, vengeful, a liar, a murderer, but I am also fair. So your suffering ends now. Derek pointed the gun to Chris' head and double-tapped him. Then he pointed it to his own head. Little brother, I'm coming. Wait for me. And pulled the trigger one last time. While Derek's body was still falling, his consciousness was basked in light and he felt pulled toward the sky. After months of grieving, a whole lifetime of misery and pain, Derek felt that all his traumas and hatred were fading away. Derek had never experienced such bliss. In this new form he felt no negative emotion, he was in peace with his past, unafraid of his future. Derek was enjoying a present that he felt could lead to endless possibilities, and there was no right and wrong, success or failure. He would simply be, no strings attached. That intoxicating feeling lasted until he suddenly woke up, alive and breathing. All his negative emotions returned, plunging him back into despair. Derek cursed inwardly while trying to focus his eyes. Maybe it was because of the shot to the head, but his vision was blurry. So much for the perfect plan. Some idiot must have rescued me and somehow I survived the journey to the hospital. I am still alive. I still have cancer. I am still alone. But when his eyes finally cleared up, they strongly disagreed with his reasoning. Derek was in some kind of huge metal corridor surrounded by dead bodies. Alien dead bodies to be precise. They were all wearing some kind of full-body armor, that resembled some kind of sci-fi space suit. Where the FK am I? What the hell does this mean? He screamed while trying to get up, only to fall back on the floor. He fell hand first, and only then he noticed that he was wearing a space suit too, and that his hands, all four of them, had 3 fingers each. What the actual FK? Chapter 5 Collateral Damage. After much screaming and freaking out, Derek finally regained his composure and started to analyze his current predicament. The first thing that caught his eye was a huge hole in the spacesuit at the chest level. The contours of the hole had burn marks all over it and there was a lot of purple jelly on both his suit and the dead bodies. That meant the purple jelly was coagulated alien blood. Derek turned his head to see the spot where he had woken up, noticing a lot of blood and even something that he found safe to assume were some kind of splattered viscera. This makes no sense, he thought. All the evidence points to the fact that this body was dead as Julius Caesar until I somehow happened to inhabit it. And for whatever reason, it's also fully healed. Oh man, this means all religions are dead wrong. Luckily I never believed in any mumbo-jumbo, otherwise I would be really disappointed right now. Derek then proceeded examining his new body. It had 4 arms, only 2 legs, but all the limbs were long and skinny. The legs were reverse jointed, like those of a cat. Both hands and feet had only 3 fingers each. Derek was really curious about his facial features, but there was no reflective surface in sight. So, he tried feeling his face with the fingers, but the suit turned out to come with a helmet, which did not impede his senses though. The only thing he could establish was the shape of the helmet, and based on it Derek's new head should have been something similar to a shark's dorsal fin. Then he tried to speak. Test, test. Derek Esposito. 1, 2, 3. He could somehow do it, but it was still English. That meant that he did not inherit neither the muscle memory nor the intellect from the body's previous owner. Derek tried getting up, but the center of gravity was too different from his old body, so he had to give up and proceed crawling like a baby. So, he started examining the corpses to make heads or tails of what was happening around him. Judging from the suits, there were 2 factions at war. One had a red-colored spacesuit, and the other, which Derek was donning, was gray. He had no idea which side was winning, but it would not make any difference to him anyway. Unless the suit was equipped with a universal translator, he was incapable of communicating. Enemies would kill him on sight, allies would probably ditch him like garbage. Who would ever want a rambling idiot, incapable even of walking during a life or death situation? I'm not even here from a day and I am already as good as dead. Refusing to give up, Derek managed to get up by leaning on the walls and started exploring. The corridor had many doors, yet his choices were painfully limited, since he could only go through the open ones. Derek had no idea how to open the doors nor how to operate the control panels that he found along the way. He tried pushing buttons at random but nothing happened. And he was starting to get hungry. Will I die like this? Starving in a goddamned spaceship, alien planet, or whatever the FK is this? I don't know what this useless pile of flesh eats. Even if I stumble on a mountain of food, I have no way to know what is what. And even if I did, I do not know how the heck to remove this helmet. After walking for several hours, hunger and frustration drove him to hysteria. Derek screamed and kicked whatever was within reach, until exhaustion made him fall asleep. When he woke up, his mind was clear again. This is a nightmare. I am all out of options, to the point that even if I wanted to kill myself, I would not know how. He banged the back of his head against the wall to keep frustration at bay. I never thought about this, but being reborn in a sci-fi environment is truly the worst-case scenario. Alien body, alien customs, complete lack of the new species' common sense. And to make things worse, everything here is so high-tech that I cannot even operate a door. Heck, every goddamn button could be tagged and it would still be useless to me since I don't know their language. His hunger was rising and he was feeling weaker by the hour. Having no time to lose, he started wandering again, this time banging and screaming at every door he met, trying to draw some attention. Derek was on the verge of fainting again due to hunger and exhaustion when finally a door opened up. The shock was great enough for him to lose his grip and fall to the ground. On the other side there were gray-suited aliens in a wedge formation. Every one of them was holding some kind of long metal staff as it was a rifle. Derek didn't even attempt to get up, he just waved a right hand, hoping it was a peace sign. Asterisk Captain. That's XARK. His life signal getting back online wasn't a glitch in the system, he is still alive. Asterisk, from this point onward asterisk means words that Derek does not understand. The formation opened and a taller and bulkier alien closed in. The soldiers never lowered their weapons nor lost focus, waiting for the attack order. Asterisk, what are you doing on the floor, soldier? And how in Thrax's name did you survive that ambush? Asterisk, the captain asked with a coarse voice. Dude, I have no idea what you did just said. Asterisk, what is he rambling? Medic, any reading on that blaster wound? Star. A purple-dressed alien walked forward while scanning Derek's body. Asterisk, none, sir. It's not any dialect in the Empire. And the scanner confirms that the hole in his armor is definitely from a Corellan blaster. I have no idea how he survived it unscathed. It's a miracle. Star. Asterisk, it's a liability. Asterisk, the captain's tone was grim. He took a staff from a soldier's hands and by pushing a button it became a glaive, whose blade was made of pure energy. Well, seems that I'm going to die from a lightsaber. It's cool, one hit, and I'll be turned into dandruff. Lucky me, another painless death incoming. When the captain plunged the glaive into his chest, it did not make any burning sound. It pierced him from side to side, bleeding him to death. The blade was not a laser-based weapon, but a hard light construct, making it no different from an ordinary glaive. Asterisk, listen up, soldiers. XARK was a good soldier and we will remember and mourn him as such. When and if we get out of this alive. But that thing, whatever that is a risk we cannot allow to take. Not with Prince Rekhart in our care and those Corellan rebel scum still at large. Better some collateral damage than a spy among our ranks. Now shut that door and check the perimeter again. Star. This time, death was far from painless for Derek. He felt like his chest was on fire, but what really hurt wasn't the wound as much the lungs. Derek was struggling to breathe. Every breath was shallower and more difficult than the last. Blood started gurgling from his mouth, and he felt like slowly drowning. His throat kept contracting trying to draw in air, but to no avail. It took Derek less than a minute to die, but for him it seemed to last forever. Once again, he found himself basked by blinding light and pulled towards it. Just like the last time, he felt all his worries and rage fading, but instead of enjoying the feeling he was simply annoyed. Derek had never believed in any god, hence he never believed in heaven or hell. Humankind has always been a terrible race, he thought. It's impossible to define someone as truly bad. Most of the times the bad guys are simply people who never got a chance to be anything but criminals. Then there are people, like me, whom life had pushed and pushed until they broke. Not to mention psycho and sociopaths. How could someone that is born bad be sent to hell simply because his head is malfunctioning? Hence, I have always believed that either there was an afterlife for everyone, or no afterlife at all. Death is supposed to be final spirit level, good or bad, rich or poor, the destination has to be the same. Instead I got this cheap excuse of reincarnation screwing with me. What purpose being reborn could possibly have if I retain all of my memories? Whatever body or planet I would end up in, I would still carry my baggage, so once outside the light all my pain, rage, and contempt toward humankind would prevent me to learn whatever lesson I am supposed to learn. Inside that otherworldly space, he had the clarity to see that his psychologist was only half right. He could only change if he wanted to, but because of all his past experiences he had no will to. It was a perfect example of a catch-22 paradox. Suddenly, he was pulled downwards and away from the light. His vision was a blur, but he could still hear a lot of commotion around him. Giant hands were holding him still while he was puking God knows what, and judging from the breeze on his butt cheeks he was naked. I don't know what the heck is going on, he thought, but I bet I am in deep sh*t again. When Derek was finally able to see again, he discovered that the hands were not gigantic, the issue was him being very small. A baby, to be precise. He is alive. I did it. I managed to save your boy's life. Star. A further inspection revealed that said hands belonged to some gibberish rambling old hag. Derek was currently inside a wooden shack, surrounded by people dressed with rags that could be called clothes only if they were part of a 1000 AD themed Renaissance fair. Man, I hate being always right. Chapter 6, A New Beginning. Asterisk, he is alive. I did it. I managed to save your boy's life. Asterisk, please, remember that asterisk means words that Derek is not capable of understanding. After the midwife triumphantly said those words, the room exploded in cheers and tears of joy. The people in the room were hugging each other and the mother in turns. Meanwhile, Derek lied limp in the midwife's arms, looking left and right trying to determine how bad was his current situation. Well, well. What do we have here? The bedridden woman is clearly this body's mother. She definitely needs a bath. After delivery, the sheets were stained with blood, urine, and feces. The crying, rough-looking man should be the father. I wonder if he is crying for my sake or just because he was afraid of losing his wife. I bet the second one. Then I have a bigger brother and a sister. This is bad. Suddenly another woman entered the bedroom bringing with her a little boy and a girl that raced to the bedridden woman. Oh damn it. This is even worse than I thought. So far I have only two possible choices. Option 1, grow into this large family, fighting every day for the few available resources. Malnourishment is most definitely a given. Then, when I am old enough, starting to work with father and brothers, getting married, having children, etc. Option 2, wait until I am tall enough to grab sharp objects, put me out of my misery and take another spin hoping for a better outcome. I think I'll go with option number 2. Meanwhile the room had become silent. The midwife had already finished cleaning the newborn, wrapped him up in a clean cloth. During all this time Derek neither moved or cried. Asterisk, Nana, what's wrong with the baby? Why is he not crying? It never happened before. Asterisk, the mother was worried, and ignoring the pain was trying to get up. Asterisk, shush, child, and don't you dare to move. I still have to heal you. Asterisk, the midwife tone did not leave space for reply. Asterisk, I delivered dozens of children, a silent one is rare but nothing special. Do you want to see how strong he is? There you go. Star. She unwrapped him from the cloth, and while holding him gently gave a little spanking, to force him to cry. Derek grunted a little, while staring at her in dismay. Want to play rough, old hag? He thought. Fine. You just triggered my trap card. Twin Flood, activate. And out of the blue he relieved both his bowels and bladder. The backdoor attackers splattered all over her feet, while the front door flood struck her on the face and chest. Derek started giggling loudly. Asterisk, well, this wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but as you can hear for yourself, this little imp is breathing just fine. Asterisk, the midwife handed the baby to another woman to clean him. Derek kept giggling, proud of his work. After washing her face with warm water and a cloth, the old hag moved her left index finger drawing a circle in the air, striking it through in the middle from right to left. Then she pronounced a single word. Ikiju. A black energy manifested on her fingertip. She proceeded to point it over her wet dress and then over her shoes. The smell of feces and urine suddenly disappeared and so did their source. With his mouth agape in shock, Derek watched as his poop would dry and crumble, turning into dust. It was akin to watching one of those fast-forwarded videos where in 1 minute you could see a seed becoming a flower. Heisenberg's beard. She is not just an old midwife. She is a real magician, in the flesh. I have never been so happy in my whole 3 lives of being so dead wrong. Derek was ecstatic, and not only because that world had magic, but also because as soon as he heard the word Ikiju, he had felt something clicking inside of him. Like if something deep inside of him had started taking root, and suddenly had become ingrained in the very fabric of his new reality. He started repeating obsessively the magic word in his mind, and trying to engrave in his memory every detail of the circular finger movement. Now that I'm clean, let me stop that bleeding, dear. The healer approached the mother and placed her hands above her nether regions. Is it time for another magic? Show me, please. Derek begged in his mind. Nana first spreaded her fingers wide, then started to move both arms in a circular motion, first up over her head, then opened her arms as much as she could before joining her hands, palm against backhand, at her navel's height. Viniri Lokat. Derek, all wrapped up, tried to mimic all her movements, step after step, memorizing every single detail he could grasp, no matter how small. A sphere of light enveloped Derek's mother's lower body and she quickly recovered her complexion. The pale skin reverted to a healthy pink, while all the traces of pain and fatigue disappeared from her face. Once again, something clicked inside him. After the dark magic, he could clearly feel that simply by hearing the power word, a connection had been established between him and light magic. Derek could not stop grinning. And I say if I have enough magical talent, it would mean there is actually a third hidden option. He thought. I can become a magician and live free for the first time in my life. No shackles, no responsibilities. But it's better not get over-enthusiastic. With my luck I could just have a poor talent or... His reasoning was abruptly interrupted. The woman that had held him until that moment was handing him to his mother. Nana, are you sure he is all right? He has yet to cry, and giggle or not he is too quiet. With all that happened, I am really afraid that something is wrong with him. After those words, the noisy room turned gloomy. Afraid that he was somewhat responsible, and quite eager to explore option number 3, Derek did his best baby impression, giggling, smiling and doing raspberry sounds. Nana felt her professional pride hurt by such allegations, but it wasn't her first time with an anxious mother. She knew Alina since she was still a child, and had delivered all her babies. Nana could not deny that this delivery had been one of the most difficult of her career. The labor had lasted hours and she had been forced to cast healing spells multiple times to stop the bleeding. When she finally could see the baby's head, she knew something was wrong. Alina was fighting with all her strength but the baby was limp. So, she had rushed and used her hands to pull out the baby as fast as possible, only to discover that he was being strangled by his own umbilical cord. After cutting and removing it, she had tried all her best spells, but to no avail. For a whole terrible minute, Nana had believed the child was lost. But then the healing light had finally activated, forcing the baby to puke, clearing his airway. Then and only then Nana started affording the luxury of relaxing. Healing magic was no miracle. It could enhance the life force of the patient, making easier to recover from an illness or healing from an injury, but it could not create life. Nana was sensitive, so she understood that Alina didn't need a lesson about magic, just be reassured about her child's health. Worry not, my child. I can prove it to you that all is well. With a warm smile, she caressed Alina's cheek and took Derek from her arms, removing the cloth like she was revealing a treasure. Nana carefully adjusted Derek in the crook of her left arm, then she circled her open right hand all around him and said, Viniri Rad 2. A small wisp of light came out of her palm, dancing around the baby before penetrating his chest. The light spreaded from head to toe, making him emit a dim light. See? If there was even a scratch on his body, my injury detecting spell would leave that area bleak. Your little son is fine. The energy flowing through his body was making Derek feel empowered. In his old life he had felt like that only few times. When he got his degrees, when he finally abandoned his parents' home, when he beat up the bullies. But all those times it had been a fleeting emotion, lasting few seconds at best. Now it was different, it wasn't just adrenaline. Real magic, Real power was coursing through every fiber of his being, making him feel invincible. So, when the spell started fading off, he could not accept that. No. Come back to me. Give me my power back. Derek screamed inwardly. He focused on the last strands of energy, willing for them to stay. He could not cast the spell on his own, but he could still feel the lingering power and started feeding it with his own. Derek's light stopped dimming and instead grew stronger and stronger. Nana was dumbfounded. She had never seen anything like that before. That was not how the spell was supposed to work. Derek wanted it to last forever, but a second later he fell asleep due to mana exhaustion, and the light disappeared quickly. Nana wrapped up the baby again and returned him to his mother's embrace. "Nana, what was that?" Alina asked, full of wonder. The old healer had no idea how to answer. Many possibilities popped up in her head, and all of them would require long explanations that would needlessly make Alina worry and maybe even forcing Nana to repeat the spell. Had been a long day, and she had no intention on prolonging it even a second more than necessary, so she borrowed a line from her childhood's favorite fairy tale. My child, I think the newborn may be blessed by the light. There is no need to worry, only to rejoice. Star. Chapter 7, A Baby's Day. Derek's first days as a baby were peaceful but far from boring. He had no responsibilities, all he to do was eat, sleep, poop and the occasional baby noise or finger-grabbing routine. That left him with all the time he needed to think about his future. On Earth it was no mystery that kids had a greater potential for learning than adults, and since his family seemed human, or at least human-like, he could hope for that to be true also in this dimension. From what he could see, his body was no different from a baby from planet Earth. He could hear his heartbeat, his chest inflating and deflating while breathing. Even the reproductive apparatus was the same. The same could be said for his new family. If it wasn't for the existence of magic, he would have simply thought to have traveled through time, but things clearly weren't that simple. Derek quickly dismissed all the "what race am I now" hypothesis as overthinking. One of the advantages of being a baby was that ignorance was perfectly fine. When the time came, someone would teach him. He determined that he had two priorities. Number 1, learn their language. All babies are supposed to learn their native language, and he had only so much time before being considered a retard, so he could not slack off. Number 2, he had somehow to figure out magic, or at least its foundations. And that also had a deadline, since his learning potential was at its peak only until his brain stopped growing. After that, he would not be different from anyone else with the same talent and disposition for magic. So, he set magic as his first priority. Being considered a slow learner was much better than being weak for life and forced to take another spin at reincarnation. Derek spent his first day in the new world in bed, together with his mother, while his father would sleep and rest in the boys' room. Whenever someone talked to him, he paid close attention, trying to figure out common words or patterns. The rest of the time he was not eating or the cloth diaper being changed. He would try to cast one of the 3 spells he knew: Ikiju, Viniri Lockhat, and Viniri Rad Tuesday. Every attempt was a failure. He could not feel even an iota of power inside himself. Comparing what he saw from what he knew from Earth's dungeons and looting, those spells had clearly a verbal and somatic component. But that couldn't be all, or at least he hoped so, otherwise until he was able to talk all his efforts would have been wasted. Failure after failure, his anxiety grew stronger. Fear of the unknown and of tomorrow started to build up. Also, getting used to poop and wet himself wasn't a pleasant feeling either. Thankfully, his mother showered him up with nothing but love and affection, making his day not a total loss. Despite his bias about mothers due to his previous life, Alina managed to make him feel loved and protected. That wasn't half bad at all. The final outcome of his first day was 0 progress in magic, no progress with language. But his mother seemed to be a good parent, and he finally learned his new name, Lith. The second day turned his world upside down. Alina, showing the strength of a wild ox, decided she was sick of resting and got up to help doing the daily chores. Lith had the opportunity to see her full figure. Despite giving birth the previous day, she was a good-looking woman, in her early 20s. She was definitely well endowed in all the right places, with a fit body honed through hard work. Her shoulder blades' long hair was of a beautiful light brown color, with shades of red all over it. Just the light of the candle made it look like there were flames dancing within. Seeing Mother with her hair down in a sunny day must be quite a sight to behold. Derek thought. Maybe it was because Lith was still a baby, maybe because of the mother-son bonding, but Lith felt deeply proud of her. He also discovered that she seemed to not use bra or underpants. Once finished dressing, she wrapped up Lith, making impossible for him to move. Then Alina placed him into her sash, using it like a baby cradle so that she could easily hold him with only one arm with minimum exertion. She walked out the small bedroom and found her older daughter, Eliza, messing with the fireplace. What in the great mother's name do you think you're doing, Lily? The sun is not even out, you should be sleeping. You know you are not allowed to mess with fire. She said with a hiss, trying to not wake up the house. I'm sorry, Mom. I just wanted to make you all a surprise. Let you wake up in an already warm house and breakfast ready. Eliza's face showed only sincere concern. There is no need to worry, silly bee. Your mommy is a pro with kids. Alina said while ruffling her hair. Eliza, together with her twin brother, was the eldest child. She was 8 years old, and her blonde hair with shades of black was the reason for her moniker. Alina shooed her away from the fireplace and with a flick of a finger lighted the fire. Infero. Thanks heavens. Lith rejoiced. Once again I had that weird feeling when discovering a new type of magic. This proves I wasn't just imagining stuff. Alina sent Lily opening the window's shutters to let the dawn light in while she prepared breakfast. Alina took several vegetables out of a cabinet and proceeded chopping them with a knife. Some had a familiar look to Lith, like some semi-potatoes and odd-colored carrots. The others were all a mystery. The idea of having such breakfast made Lith almost cry. In his past life he never liked vegetables, they were all bland-tasting. No matter how much of them he ate, within half an hour he would be hungry again. Alina shoved everything inside a small copper cauldron and with the help of a hook hanged it on a metal bar over the fire. Then with a finger snap she conjured water out of nowhere, filling the cauldron. Both Lith and Eliza were ecstatic, even though for completely different reasons. For Lith it meant hope. Spells could be cast without words or precise hands movements, and that showed him that there was a real chance for him to practice magic while still being baby. For Eliza was a reason for pride. Magic was common, but every time Alina cast a silent spell it was like watching a real magician at work. You are so amazing, Mom. Eliza's eyes were full of admiration. Will I ever be as good as you with magic? Of course you will, silly bee. Alina replied with a kind smile, while inwardly adding, after 10+ years of chores, every single day. After a while, everyone woke up to have breakfast together. The family consisted of Raz, father, Alina, 2 daughters, Eliza and Tista, and 2 sons, Orpal and Tryon. Lith could then establish with depressing certainty that there was no such a thing as an indoor bathroom. From what he could see the house consisted of a big room used as dining room, kitchen, and pantry with 3 doors that lead to the various bedrooms and nothing else. The breakfast was relatively quiet, so he had no problems learning the word for water magic when his father filled some jugs. Jorun. After everyone left for their daily routine, Alina moved along with Lith to a rocking chair. During the morning he had the pleasure to discover that in the new world the daily chores like washing the dishes or cleaning the floors were all performed using magic. From her rocking chair, Alina would simply twirl her index and medium finger while reciting Breza, to generate up to 3 small whirlwinds that she would move all around the house to collect and get rid of the dust. Whenever someone would dirty the floor with earth or mud, a flick of the wrist and a magna would send them back through the same door they were brought in. Lith was delighted discovering how common the use of magic was. Everyone in the family, even the younger ones, would use magic to make their life easier. When bedtime arrived, Lith was dying to try some magic. He had waited so long for his hands and feet to be finally free. Alina fell asleep almost instantly, yet Lith was impatient enough to have the impression of having waited for hours. After a full day of thinking, he had decided to try only air magic first until he was confident enough in his magic control abilities. Fire was just too dangerous for a novice, while water and light would easily wake up his mother. He could not spot any dirt to control in the dim light of the room, and was too afraid to mess up with darkness magic until he got a better understanding of it. So, he twirled his little arm and said, "Eaa." Nothing happened. Lith tried and failed countless times before giving up. He did not know how long his baby body would have lasted until falling asleep, so he stopped despairing and started thinking. Magic was common. Whenever he heard for the first time an elemental magic word, something inside him had clicked, like creating a connection with the elemental energy. Those were all good news, but he still couldn't make head or tails why he was always failing. He never expected succeeding at the first try, but he had thought that something would have manifested. A random tiny gust of wind, a magic spark, anything would do. So, he started thinking back to when the healer had filled him with power. That feeling was not new to him, but he never experienced it so intense. Lith searched his memory until he found the answer. It was the same sensation that he had when he started practicing Aikido, while learning the basic breathing technique. Well, I have nothing to lose. Let's give it a try. Lith breathed in through his diaphragm, the anus relaxed, to get the world energy in. Then he would contract the anus, holding the breath for some seconds to let the energy settle in before breathing out, relaxing his whole body. Back on Earth, he had always thought that the intoxicating feeling he experienced during his first days of practice was just some kind of placebo effect. His naive young mind deluding itself that the weak could miraculously become strong just believing and practicing in all that ki/internal energy nonsense. But what if he later stopped experiencing that sensation only because his native world energy was just too thin? After some time, Lith started to feel a tingle all around his body, and then the energy seemed to move and condense inside his solar plexus. The more he performed the breathing technique, more clearly he could sense the energy getting more stable. In his old video games, mana was always blue. So, he visualized a blue sphere settling inside his solar plexus. After a while, Lith felt brimming with power. After holding his breath one last time, he twirled his little arm before commanding, "Eaa." The wind generated barely tweaked his mother's hair, while he had aimed for the blanket. Yet he could not stop grinning. This is really a great start. Chapter 8: Unrelenting Practice. In the following weeks, Lith's days consisted of a strict routine. During the day, when he was all wrapped up, he would only focus on practicing the breathing technique and learning as much as he could about his family and their language. At night he would practice magic until exhaustion made him fall asleep. Then as soon as he woke up, he would start again until Alina would get up for the day. More than once he tried taking a break, but it would never last long. Living as a baby was not easy, on the contrary, was very stressful. He could not speak, even the words he had already understood to not scare his family. He could not move, he could do nothing but watch, sleep, eat, and relieve his bowels. He was not used to be so helpless and dependent on someone else for every little thing. Too much free time would bring him to the verge of insanity. So, he would practice and practice, trying to adjust to his new reality without overthinking about how absurd and irrational was his situation. As Lith's powers increased, so did his control, and after a few weeks he felt confident enough to try earth magic and water magic. He would always be careful, never conjuring more than a few droplets of water or manipulating a handful of dirt. He discovered that it was possible to make the elements float in mid-air, changing their shape and size by continuously spending mana. After that, he shifted his night training on focus and control rather than power. His mana was very limited and he much preferred doing few elaborate tricks perfectly rather than a lot of stuff at the risk of blowing his cover. No matter how common magic was, Lith doubted that a baby practicing it would be any less than shocking, or even terrifying. Lith was afraid of being abandoned by his family, or even worse killed. He was once again scared of death, since now he had too much to lose. What were the odds to find another world where magic existed, to be born as a baby in a loving family? Zero, none, nada, squat. He had to play his cards well, and play them as close to the vest as possible. Before revealing even a hint of his talent, he needed to know what the standards of that world were. How much talent was considered good, how much divided being considered a genius from being labeled as a monster. His mind was constantly filled with worries and only training would alleviate his anxiety. After 3 months, he had become good enough at silent magic to try fire magic on the fireplace. The fire was already lit, and when everyone was busy talking and eating during breakfast, he tried making the flames dance at will. It ended up in failure, since the flames were too strong and the distance too big for his mana to have any effect. Yet he kept trying, since he could still sense the flow of magic going from himself to the fireplace, hence making it a good training to expand his mana sense and range. The only downside of all that training was that Lith would get hungry faster. Luckily, he was not Alina's first glutton and she had no shortage of milk. Another month passed, and Alina started weaning him. This event was meaningful for 2 reasons. The first was Lith noticing that food wasn't abundant in his household, so even if he still had not a rich vocabulary, he could still read his parents' worried expressions every time he needed to be fed. Despite still being a cold-hearted, cynical misanthrope at his core, Lith could not help but feel guilty about it. They loved him like a child, while he would consider them nothing more than hosts, like a parasite. The only exceptions were Alina and Eliza, his big sister, the only one that along with his mother would take care of him. With their constant love, affection, and care had managed to crack his emotional defensive wall. The more time he spent with them, the more he would consider them part of his real family, not just people that he was leading by the nose. So, he started limiting his training to not exceed the amount of food they could afford. Even that required quite a few tries to find the right amount, since too little would cause even more worry than too much. The second reason were world-changing discoveries. Being forced to stop training magic as much as possible, Lith now had free time that he used to dedicate that time by practicing the breathing technique, that he christened accumulation. That way, his inner energy, that he had long dubbed as mana core, grew faster to the point of hitting a bottleneck. Apparently, his body wasn't big or strong enough or both, to hold an indefinite amount of mana. Lith never noticed before because his baby body was rapidly growing, and he had only so much time to expand the mana core. So, without realizing it, his body and mana core had developed together. But now the balance had been broken, and practicing accumulation would make every fiber of his body ache, so he was forced to stop. Luckily he was still well fed and developing fast, so despite not being able doing any physical exercise, the bottlenecks would not last long. The second discovery was the result of him being forced not to practice magic or use accumulation. While studying his bottleneck status, he found out that it was possible to modify the breathing technique by removing the breath-holding step. That way, the world energy would just flow in and out his body, energizing him like a good night's sleep. Lith named this new technique invigoration. After several tries, he discovered that the world's mana could allow him to stay awake for several days, but not indefinitely. Each time he would use invigoration, the energizing effect would last less and less, and only sleeping would reset its effectiveness. But the most important discovery, as almost always happens, was made by chance. After adjusting his food intake, Litha's greatest enemy had become the hunger. Not the slight appetite that can be fixed by a candy bar or the hankering after a busy morning. It was the kind of hunger that never goes away, always lurking, even right after a meal. Even though Lith was not starving, it was something that he had never experienced. Even among all the misfortunes of his first life, food had never been an issue. He had always been able to eat to his heart content, even allowing himself to be picky about food. But now he was so hungry that he ate until the last bite, and if his body had allowed him to, he would not hesitate licking the plate clean. In the good days, when the portions were larger, it was like white noise, annoying but easily ignored. But during the bad days, either because the rations were smaller or because he had lost himself in the practice of magic consuming too much mana, it would become a thorn in his head. He would be so hungry to have a headache all day long, often feeling lightheaded and incapable of focusing. Food would be the only thing he would think or dream about. Of course, he was not the only hungry one in the family. Aside from Alina, only his siblings Orpal and Eliza would be tasked to feed him. And while Eliza had a big heart and strived to be like her mother, Orpal was angrier and hungrier by the day. He would often daydream about the days when he and his twin were the only children in the house. Now not only he had to fight each day for his parents' attention, but also for the food, clothes, and so on. Once he had a room only for himself, then he had to share it with Tryon. It was just a matter of time before Lith would come to take away what little personal space he still had. Orpal could not understand why a family as poor as his own would keep making kids. It was winter, so there was not much work to do. Hence there weren't many occasions to restock their food supplies, and they had to last until spring. It was the toughest time of the year for all the farmers' families, since the food was meant not only for men but also for the animals. Orpal was sick of seeing Lith gobbling all the food, to the point of dubbing him leech. So, whenever it was his turn to feed the little vermin, he would take some spoonful for himself. But Lith was not easily bullied. As soon as he noticed the spoon was not aimed to him, he would start to cry madly, and Alina would run to his side, foiling Orpal's plan. Lith never cried, unless he needed to be fed or changed, and that made their parents both really happy and paranoid about him. Since he would never cry wolf, they took every wail very seriously. That day was a really bad day for Lith, starving because of his growth spurt, and was Orpal's turn to take care of him. Both their parents were out, one of the cows seemed to suffer from frostbite. So Orpal took the plate full of creamy soup for the baby, and gulped down a full spoonful. Lith immediately started to cry, but there was no one to hear him. "Cry all you want, leech." Lith was now able to understand most of the common words, included Orpal's mockery. "Today is just you and I. No mom in a shining armor to come to your rescue." After saying that he gulped down another one. Lith felt like he was going crazy. Once again, he was helpless, his so-called magic useless in time of need. What could he possibly do, aside from blowing his cover? Ventilate him? Wet him? Using fire was too dangerous, a single meal was not worthy burning down a house. Litha's hunger was eating him, and his rage went above and beyond what he would have ever thought possible. "You fool!" he yelled inwardly. Feeling so tough robbing a child. Then he saw the third spoonful, making a good half of his meal gone, moving toward Orpal's smug face. Litha's anger reached a new peak, his hatred burning like a fire. "You are not my brother!" he yelled inwardly. "You are nothing but a filthy thief, trash." And then, more than clicking, he felt something breaking inside like a dam that could not hold the raging waters anymore. "I hope you choke on that spoon, **T. Lith waved his arm against Orpal in a final struggle, and then it happened. Lith felt the mana going out to his body, reaching the spoon already in Orpal's mouth, and pushing it down, hard. Orpal started to choke, and after removing the spoon from his throat he started puking. Lith was so astonished to almost forget about both his rage and hunger. He had discovered something wonderful, a power that no one else in his family seemed to have. Lith had discovered spirit magic. Chapter 9, Understanding Spirit Magic. At that time, Alina and Raz, father, were coming back to the house. Upon hearing Litha's desperate cries, they ran back to check on him. When they found Orpal on the ground, puking, they understood what had happened. They already had suspicions, since whenever Orpal fed Lith, he was always hungrier than usual. But now they had proof. Inside the pool of vomit, the undigested creamy soup was as clear as the day. Raz became red with anger. You little. But had to stop, his other children had returned as well. I am very disappointed in you, Orpal, said Alina, seeing that her hubby was too angry to speak. From now on, Alina will be the one feeding Lith. You can take all her shifts in the stable, since I don't think that even you could eat hay. But Mom, Orpal said, trying to defend himself. He hated cows and their smell. No buts, young man. Raz yelled. And that is not punishment enough? Alina, feel free to prepare one more bowl for Lith, and take the food from Orpal's share. He must learn that bad actions have consequences. They were speaking too fast for Lith, and there were too many unknown words. But Orpal had just turned pale, so it had to be good news. Orpal started crying and apologizing, but Lith made sure to cry louder, so Raz and Alina both ignored his pleas and sent him to take care of the animals. After being fed with a generous serving of soup and milk, Lith could finally focus on what had happened. After days of trial and error experiments, he had grasped the basics of his newfound ability and gained a much deeper understanding of magic. Lith had discovered that when he cast an elemental spell, it actually consisted in a three-step process. First, he would emit the mana, then he had to mix it with the world energy that he was trying to manipulate. The last step was the hardest one, controlling the spell and its effects. Spirit magic skipped the second step, it used only his own power, without borrowing elemental energy. That made it more difficult than any magic he had practiced so far and more mana-consuming. It also required much more focus compared to normal magic. Pure mana had no physical form, so he could not rely on his eyes for manipulating its effects. All depended on his willpower and imagination. The clearer was the mental image of the action he wanted the mana to make, the better the result. The range was also very limited, barely reaching a meter, 3,28 feet, radius. Despite all its strict limitations, Lith started to practice anything but spirit magic. The ultimate discovery about it was that every improvement he did in spirit magic was also passed on all other kinds of magic. He didn't need to switch practicing between them anymore, and so he progressed in leap and bounds compared to before. From time to time, he would use a random elemental magic to check on his progress, reaching a new understanding of the profoundness of that element. The progress Lith made allowed him to also improve his breathing techniques. Through accumulation, he could now not only perceive how his mana core changed in size with practice, but also have a rough understanding of the amount of mana contained in his body. Using accumulation, he would feed the world energy to his mana core, allowing it to expand from the size of a pinhead to that of a glass marble. Once the mana core grew to marble size, further progress could only be made when the physical body forcefully compressed the mana core back to pinhead. Lith had no idea how the phenomenon worked, and had found no way around it. Mana core and body development had to go hand in hand, there was no shortcut. Bottlenecks happened when Lith tried to use accumulation when the mana core was still at its peak size. The world energy would be rejected by the mana core, going wild through his body and damaging it. By continuously undergoing expansion and compression cycles, his mana capacity was already incomparable to when he was just a newborn. After discovering and practicing spirit magic, Lith had a much finer control of his mana, inside and outside his body. He managed to modify the invigoration technique, so that when he breathed in the world mana, he would combine it with his own, temporarily exceeding his limits. Then he would expand the resulting energy, moving it from the solar plexus outwards, until even his body hair would be overflowing with mana. Ever since he invented invigoration, he had noticed qualitative changes to his body. Lith was now better at withstanding cold and head, and he would hardly ever get sick. When his whole family would catch a cold, he would either get over it before the symptoms manifested or recover in a few days. Unless it's all a crazy coincidence, improving invigoration is the only mean at my disposal to temper my body. If I am right, this means that I can use it as a crutch until I get big enough to do physical activity. He thought. Hopefully, it should also help me overcome my bottleneck periods faster. It's a gamble, but it shouldn't do any harm. Also, between hunger and bottlenecks, there isn't much I can do as a 7-month-old baby. As for his family life, it also experienced some changes during the following months. After the soup incident with Orpal, a divide opened between the brothers. Lith was vengeful by nature, and so was his brother. Sometimes, when Orpal was angry, would call him Leech instead of Lith, since he always called him like that in his mind. Every slip of the tongue would cost him a serious scolding, and when he did it while harshly arguing with his parents, even a good spanking. Orpal blamed Lith for all of his misfortunes. The little runt always giggled when he was having a hard time. The relationship between Lith and his parents, instead, kept getting better and better. He had already started saying babble words, making sure to say mama when Alina embraced him and dada whenever Raz came near him. If this world is even a bit similar to Earth's middle age, is better to stay in my old man's good book until I am self-sufficient. This was Litha's reasoning. He was still very afraid of father figures, and the two of them didn't had much a relationship anyway. Raz would always be busy with something, letting his wife and eldest daughter spend the most time with the baby. To his defense, he had just wrongly assumed that Lith was too little to notice, and that they would have time catch up later in the future, like he did with his other sons. Raz really loved him, and Lith never ceased to amaze him. He couldn't remember him crying for no reason, not even when teething. If someone bumped into his cradle or raised his voice while Lith was asleep, or at least pretending to, he would not make a sound, just look around before going back to sleep. Lith increasingly grew fond of Eliza. It was more like a loving aunt than a sister to him. He could see himself in her, taking care of her little brother like he did with Carl. He would have loved to express this love, but all he could do was smile and laugh as soon as he saw her, and call her Lala. She was in fact the only one, beside his parents, to have a Babel name. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to her. And so, time went by. After 6 months from his arrival, Lith was put on the ground for the first time and started to crawl under strict supervision. At the 9th month he started to walk and graduated himself from Babel words to real ones. On the day of his birthday, after discovering they had birthdays in that world too, he allowed himself to use simple phrases and started to make questions to complete his vocabulary. Knowing nothing about babies, it was very stressful finding the right timing for every little thing. Luckily, Lith could always resort on cheating to find out the proper time for him to learn to do something. He was already capable of understanding most of what he could hear, so he would always be open to suggestions. If Alina was dying for him to finally say mommy instead of mama, he would wait a couple of days before making it happen. If Raz cheered for Lith running to him, he did. The real problem was paying attention to everything Raz, Eliza and Alina said while being seemingly completely oblivious about their words. Another problem was that once they let him roam free in the dining room, they gave him also small wooden toys expecting him to play and explore his surroundings. Lith already knew the dining room as the back of his hand, and there was not much to see in the first place. Yet he had to pretend to be curious about it. That was the hardest thing he had ever done since becoming a baby, and scared him to death. He had no clue how a child would explore such bland environment, and his paranoia about blowing his cover made him sweating bullets. Seeing the expectation in their eyes, he started from the nearest thing, the fireplace. The fire was not lit, the logs were cold and covered in ashes. When he got closer, Raz stopped him. "This is the fireplace. Now is safe, but fire is bad. Fire hurts. No touching it, never." Lith looked at him, seemingly confused, before trying to put his hand in the ashes. Raz grabbed his hand, blocking him. "Fire is bad. No touching it? Never." His father repeated. Lith stared in his eyes like he was deeply in thought, before asking, "Fire bad?" "Yes, very bad." Raz replied while nodding. "Okay." Lith moved away from the fireplace and got close to the table. When he tried climbing up a chair, almost falling down with it, Alina ran to his rescue. "Good gods, this little one sure likes danger." Seeing their increasingly worried expressions, Lith believed to have found a way out that torment. He would keep putting himself in danger, trying to climb on the table and going into the kitchen rummaging through pots and knives. Quickly they decided that adventure time was over. They made him sit on an old cloth spreaded over the wooden floor, and gave him toys to play with while they recovered from the stress. He had a little wooden horse, some kind of cart, and an odd-looking dog thingy. Playing was much easier to him. Lith did not need to create stories or explaining what he was doing. He could just use playtime to practice spirit magic. Lith would actually never use his hands to move the toys, making them float as close as possible to his fingers. He really enjoyed those moments. Lith could finally openly rejoice, scream and laugh anytime he made a new discovery or a breakthrough, and all his parents would see was a happy child lost in his fantasies. Who would have ever thought that such a quiet little fellow could have such a vivid imagination? Raz said with a big, proud smile on his face. "Look at him. All he has is just some old toys, yet it looks like he has the whole world in the palm of his hand." Chapter 10 Growing Pains. The following years weren't easy on Lith. He was finally allowed to do a lot of questions, filling most of the holes in his vocabulary and starting to finally learn about his family and the new world. He learned that they were living in the village of Lucia, that was part of the county of Lustria, which in turn was part of the Griffin Kingdom. His parents knew about the neighboring countries by name, but that was it. They knew nothing about the life outside the village, nor they cared about it. In their eyes the king was some sort of mythical beast. They put all their faith and worries in Count Lucia. Not only he administered justice and taxes in the county, he would also always take part in Lucia's spring festival as the guest of honor. His parents never mentioned to their children anything about magic, wars or history. They only told them tales that could be easily dismissed as bedtime stories even in this new world. All of their stories were filled with beautiful princesses, valiant heroes, and villainous tyrants. Lith was truly dissatisfied by such little information. He wanted to know what was the planet's name, what was the stage of scientific development it had developed. He wanted to learn about the history of magic, the lore, the legends, anything that could give him at least a clue about what to expect from life. But it was clear they knew little more than gossip, so he could not make questions he was not even supposed to think about. At least his family tree was much easier to fully understand. Alina and Raz had married very early, even by village standards, barely 16. Raz, being an only child, had inherited his father's farm, where they were currently living. Alina got pregnant shortly after the marriage, giving birth to the twins Eliza and Orpel. Then she got pregnant again every 2 years. That meant that Raz and Alina were currently 25 years old, Eliza and Orpel 8 years old, Tryon 6 years old, Tista 4 years old and finally Lith 2 years old. In fact, most of the information were leached from his siblings' questions. Lith was mostly limited to a "what's this? Why is that?" kind of question. Spending more and more time with the rest of the family, he also discovered why, despite his father owned such a nice farm, with its own barn and henhouse, had so much problems putting food on the table. Tista was born with a congenital condition that prevented her from doing any physical exertion and made her also prone to illness. Fast pacing was enough to leave her out of breath. She would chuff from time to time, and when things were about to turn for the worse, the cough would become violent. At that point one of her parents would have to run to the village to let Nana visit and heal her. But she could not really cure her, only alleviate the symptoms and return her to her natural state. And while a checkup wasn't expensive, the treatment was. Also, even if Raz did go picking her up and then brought Nana back home, it would still cost an extra. Doing a round trip meant her losing business, so she required compensation. It was the constant need for the healer to put such a strain on their budget. Lith felt very sorry for her. Despite not having spent much time with Tista, she was precious for both Alina and Eliza, and that was more than enough to make her precious for him too. He felt helpless, cursing his inability to ever practice light and darkness magic. Light magic required a patient, and until he had gained a solid grasp of how it worked and what was this world's human anatomy, he would not dare putting anyone's health at risk. Darkness magic was another story. Lith had only seen it once, no one in his family used it. And even in that one occasion, he had clearly felt the destructive power it held. He was also biased against it, since on Earth dark magic would always be associated with evil practices and undeads, so he had no desire to dabble with something potentially horrifying. Lith could only live on, hoping to eventually get some training in magic, while enduring the madness that he was getting used to call family life. He had to be lively, but not too much. He had to be curious, but not too much. He had to run around but never get out of the door. His parents were never satisfied. If he tried to sit in corner meditating, they would worry because he was too quiet or too lazy. If he tried to move around or help them, he would be scolded for getting in the way. They refused to teach him chore magic, that was the name of the lesser spells they used on their daily life, and prohibited him to learn them. Lith could not go outside without being accompanied by someone, could not get near to the fireplace, could not make too many questions. Everything was basically prohibited until he grew up. More than once Lith wanted to scream, "I may be biologically young, but I am actually the oldest in here, damn it," but all he could do was suck it up and obey. His feud with Orpal never resolved, and he could clearly feel Trion's hostility on his brother's behalf. Clearly Orpal was for Trion what Eliza was for Lith, his role model. Unlike Orpal, Trion would not completely ignore him, even when their parents were absent. But Lith could clearly see that every time his brother helped him, it was just to be polite. There was no kindness between them. Lith quickly started ignoring him in return. "I have already spent half of my old life being worried about dysfunctional family members. Been there, done that. So thank you, but no thank you. If you want to be a jerk, be my guest. I don't give a damn about you." These were his thoughts about the matter, so he let things fester. Once he became 3 years old, he could not take it anymore. The boredom caused by the cold winter months where he was basically stuck at home 24/7, aggravated by the constant hunger, was about to drive him insane. It was a stormy afternoon, and the family was gathered around the fireplace. Alina was teaching her daughters how to sew. Raz was teaching Orpal how to carve wood, while Trion and Lith were only allowed to watch. They were still too little to handle any sharp object, even sewing was off limits. Lith had already asked, baffling his father and flattering her mother. "You are too little, and your hands are still too clumsy," she replied. And Alina was right. Litha's body felt even clumsier than his old one, before he started practicing martial arts. Just the thought of all the lost muscle memory was enough to make him cry. So, he patiently waited that Raz finished instructing Orpal, and then Lith mustered all his courage and asked him to teach him how to read, write, and count. Raz was flabbergasted. "You are too young. Usually kids wait until they are 6 years old to go to school and learn. Don't you think is boring?" That was the philosophy every man in his lineage had always upheld. Boring? What could possibly be more boring than sit here doing nothing? Like yesterday and the day before. And probably tomorrow too. "Please daddy, try me. I beg you, please, please, please." Raz didn't know how to say no. Lith had never asked him anything before. Even when he is clearly still hungry, if he notices there is no more food, he never asks for more. He thought unlike Orpal. "I don't know if is Lith that is too good, or I am just spoiling Orpal too much." He really wanted a way out, but Alina was already staring at him. Her hands never stopped sewing, her mouth explaining the girls what they were doing wrong, but her eyes were clearly set on him. Damn it, what can I say? Learning does not even require dangerous tools. That's it? The tools. I'm such a moron sometimes. Raz looked in Litha's puppy eyes, his heart squeezed as in a vice, but he still replied, "I'm sorry son, we have nothing you could possibly write on. So, I can't teach you." Lith had considered things through before asking, so he had already a solution at hand. He picked the biggest tray they had, and filled it with the ashes collected in a bucket beside the fireplace. "Now we do. We can write as much as we want." Raz was amazed by Litha's ingenuity, and so was Alina. He was about to object again when he noticed that the stare had turned into a frown. Her hands were moving too fast, and that meant trouble for him. There was a storm outside, he could not run away from the one that was brewing inside. So with a deep sigh, he gave up. "From what do you want to start?" Raz could only hope that Lith would get bored fast and let him return to his leisure. "Count." Lith promptly replied. So Raz sat on the floor beside him and started drawing lines in the ash. Lith was ecstatic. The numbers they used had a different shape from the Arabic numerals, but aside from that they were identical in use, even the calculation methods were the same. So, he kept the new numbers in the upper row to learn their shape, and then started doing the multiplication tables. He could actually do such simple math in his head, but he needed to engrave the new numbers in both his mind and body. Once he finished, Lith started taking requests from his audience, and when Orpal sarcastically asked how much is 124 times 11, he quickly replied with flat 1364, leaving them all speechless. Alina could not help herself, standing up and lifting Lith up in a big hug. "My little genius. I'm so proud of you." In less than 1 hour he had mastered what it would take others a full year to do. Eliza and Tista soon joined her in the embrace, congratulating their little brother, while the male side of the family was still flabbergasted. In rural areas they learned how to count only to not get ripped off when they sold or bought merchandise. So, they remembered only addition and subtraction, letting the useless multiplications and divisions fade away in their minds. Reading and writing required more time, but it was equally simple. Lith already knew most of the words and how to spell them. He only needed to learn the alphabet and memorize it, to be able to read and write. Once again his family was stunned, and the only one not rejoicing with them was Orpal, left alone with his envy and scorn. Chapter 11. I know that I know nothing. Having officially learned how to read and write, Lith practiced every day. While his family considered him a genius, he knew better. Needing to practice hard to memorize just 21 letters and 10 numbers, Lith did not feel much brilliant. Striking the iron while it was still hot, he asked Raz to carve for him a wooden ruler, 50 centimeters, 19,7 inches, long and 3 centimeters, 1,2 inches, both high and wide. In the front he had engraved all the alphabet, on the back the numbers. It was Litha's clutch during his homework, a tool necessary for him to be free of practicing any time without bothering his parents. Raz was still on cloud 9, so he didn't make any question about the oddly big sizes Lith requested. He could have easily made it much thinner and shorter, making it easier to carry around. But Lith refused the proposal, begging him to fulfill his wish. Lith had not missed Orpal's hostile glare every time someone called him a genius. He had to be sure for it to be not easy to break or go missing by accident. It was also the perfect pretext to always carry around something he could practice spirit magic on. When the weather finally cleared up, Alina decided that it was the perfect moment for Tista to be checked out by Nana. With all the cold and wind during those last days, no matter how much effort Raz and Orpal had put in the house's maintenance, it had still been kinda drafty. Tista had been coughing enough for Alina being seriously worried about her. So, she took the mule cart and brought Tista and Lith to the village of Lucia. The bad weather had lasted too long, and the accumulated farm work needed everyone's help to be finished before another frost wave arrived. She had to bring Lith along, he was too small to be left alone. After stuffing them with the warmer clothes they had, the trip began. Lith was really happy, it was the first time for him seeing the world outside the farm's bounds. There was much he could learn from such experience. On the road they were bothered more than once by stray grots. They were wasp-like insects with a venomous sting at the end of their abdomen. Compared to Earth's wasps they were much hairier, and blue instead of yellow. Why in the Great Mother's name are they still around? Alina complained. They are supposed to be asleep during winter. One groth was particularly stubborn and despite all their shooing, it kept going back until it got too close to Tista for comfort. Lith slammed his hands hard, missing it entirely. He was still nimble as a brick, but his spirit magic wasn't. It had already reached a radius of full 10 meters, 32,8 feet, radius of effect, so the groth was squashed effortlessly. Lith showed the prey with pride. "Don't worry, big sister, I'll always protect you." After hugging him, Tista was really curious about the dead insect, but Alina was still worried by the venom, so after throwing it away, they resumed their trip. When they came in sight of Lucia, much of Litha's doubts got cleared up. It wasn't just his family, the whole village resembled closely one of those early Middle Ages drawings he had seen in history books. There was no sign of any complex technology, even a windmill or a watermill would have been considered a marvel of science. When Lith asked Alina about the village, she explained that only artisans, scholars, and merchants lived there, the rest of the population lived in their own farms tending the fields and raising livestock. Lucia consisted in a few dozens of 1 or 2 stories high wooden houses well spaced between them. Not even one was made out of stone or bricks. There was also no road pavement of any sorts. The space between the houses was just like the road to the village, bare earth and mud. From the signs hanged outside the buildings, he could spot a blacksmith, a tavern, and a tailor shop. The bakery didn't need any sign or advertisement, the delicious smell that came out its chimney was enough to make every passerby's mouth watery. Litha's hunger struck so hard that he already knew what he would have dreamed about that night. When they arrived at Nana's house, Lith was surprised noticing it was bigger than their own, yet Alina had told him more than once that Nana lived alone. In his eyes it meant that either she was from a rich family, or more likely healing was a lucrative business. Lith decided that he had to master light magic as soon as possible. The door was open, and inside Lith felt the familiar feeling of a doctor's waiting room. Inside there was a single huge room that smelled of medicinal herbs and incense. At the end of the room, on the left there was a door, probably leading to Nana's living quarter. On the right there was a huge wide curtain, behind which Nana was visiting and treating the patients. The rest of the space was filled with benches and chairs, and many of them were already occupied. It seemed that many families had decided to make use of the good weather. Alina removed all the extra clothing from her children before instructing them to be quiet and don't disturb others. The waiting room was filled with bored mothers, and soon Alina joined the chatting. sharing her experiences and advices with them. Lith could wander around undisturbed, the women were too busy keeping their children under control to take notice of his existence. The room was bare and uninteresting, but once he got close to the curtain he stumbled on a treasure. He found a small open cabinet, filled with books about magic. Maybe in this world is the equivalent of a doctor hanging his degrees and masters. Many of the titles were specific about an element or its application, but one caught his eye immediately. It had the basics of magic written on the cover. After checking that no one was paying him attention, he grabbed it and started reading. "I'm only 3 years old. I can afford a better to ask forgiveness than permission attitude." Lith then moved to a corner, giving his back to the curtain hoping to go unnoticed as long as possible. It was clearly a book for beginners, so he skipped the introduction going straight for the element's description. Lith discovered that water magic was not just about conjuring and manipulating water, it also allowed the user to lower anything's temperature. Any magic apprentice was supposed to be able to generate ice, and use it as a mean of both offense and defense. Air magic too had an ability that he had never taken in consideration. Air magic highest peak was weather control, but even at the basic level a mage could generate lightning. Fire and earth were just plain and simple as he had pictured them all along, so he moved to the last two elements. While reading, it became clear to him that because of magic, whoever had written the book had no idea what anatomy was. The book would speak about the importance of keeping a wound clean, there was no use of terms like disinfection or sepsis, so he barely found unknown medical terms. Lith remained dumbfounded upon discovering that light and darkness were explained together instead that in separate chapters. According to the book, both elements were the bread and butter of any healer. Darkness magic could be used as a weapon, but it was not explained in detail. The author was very clear, stressing out the fact that he was not a fighter, and that beginners should never bite more than they could chew. Then he proceeded to explain that darkness magic wasn't either good or bad, just an element like the others. It was an invaluable tool for a healer, since it allowed to clean wounds, tools, or even to fumigate houses from rats and insects to avoid the spreading of diseases. Also, it was the only way of getting rid of parasites that had grown inside the patient, since light magic would allow the healer to detect their presence, but could do no harm to them. Light and darkness worked best when used together. Light magic's specialty was the ability to perceive life forces and scan them for anomalies. It also allowed to correct such anomalies and to guarantee an instant recovery from most diseases. Restoring broken bones was more difficult, and was explained in another chapter. Lith felt incredibly ignorant and stupid. He could have discovered most of those elemental properties on his own, if he hadn't been blinded by his narrow-minded superstition. How could I possibly have been so idiotic? I have lived here more than 3 years and I am still thinking like this is a video game with fixed rules and levels? Darkness is evil and light is holy or something. No, this is science, damn it, the same one I studied all my life. If fire magic is converting mana into heat, then water magic is nothing but converting mana into cold, condensing the water in the atmosphere and turning it into the liquid state. It's all so obvious, it's like the damned Columbus egg. He was about to turn the page and learn about healing broken bones when a firm hand squeezed his shoulder, locking him into place. That's not a toy, young man. I really hope that you have not damaged it, otherwise your family will have paid for it dearly. Chapter 12 Learning a Trade. Lith had been so engrossed reading to forget where he was, throwing caution to the wind. When Nana caught him red-handed, he was startled enough to yelp. I thought I knew every single rascal, but I failed to recognize this one. What's your name, kid? Lith. What's yours? He replied while making puppy eyes. Nana was now more curious than angry. Lith? Do you mean Alina's little imp? No wonder your face is new to me, you were just a newborn the last time I saw you. Nana's presence had made the chatter stop. Some women wanted to ask her how long until their turn, others were just curious, Alina jumped out from her chair apologizing on Litha's behalf. "There's no need to apologize, Alina," Nana said. "No harm, no foul. The little imp has not damaged the book while playing with it?" "Yes, Mom, there is no need to apologize. Lith hated when someone spoke of him like he wasn't there. And I was not playing with it, I was just reading." "Reading? Young man, how old are you? 3 years and something? If this is a joke, it's not funny. I never expected one of Alina's children to be such a liar." "He is not lying. During the last storm, Lith was bored, so he asked his father to teach him how to read, write, and count. Here is proof." Alina handed Nana the wooden ruler. Alina's rebuttal had caught her by surprise, she realized to have struck a nerve. After studying the ruler, Nana had to admit it was a clever learning tool. "Tell your husband that this thing is really a good idea. He could sell it to Teacher Hoyle. It never hurts to have extra money." Alina wouldn't let her change the subject, not until she apologized for calling her son a liar. "Raz didn't invent it? Lith did, so he could study alone without bothering anyone." Nana was shaken by all those sudden revelations. Her pride wanted to avoid apologizing, but insinuating that Alina too was lying in front of all those people would have hurt her whole family's reputation. "So, young man, how much is 7 times 6? 42. Nana took the book from Litha's hands, and after opening a random page, she gave it back. "What is written there? Start from the top of the page." Lith suppressed a smirk. "The first thing to understand while studying magic is that it's just a tool. Anyone can use it, but only few can actually use it properly. In fact." "Okay, that's enough. I owe you an apology, Lith." Yet she said it while looking at Alina. "Seems your son is indeed blessed by the light, dear." The room was once again resounding with chatter, but this time they were all discussing the same topic. "What does Nana mean with blessed by the light? Isn't that just a fairy tale? I wish my son was that smart. Every morning just sending him to school is a war of attrition. Not to mention getting some actual results." Those were the most common comments. Lith kept hitting the iron while it was still hot. "Can I?" Suddenly he realized that he ignored the word borrow. "Take it with me for some time. I will return it as it is. I promise." "And what would you do with it? Can you already use magic?" Nana's reply would have normally been quite different, but she had had enough surprises for the day and could not afford any more sarcasm or skepticism. "Yes, I can," Lith replied before realizing his mistake. "I'm an idiot. I just blew my cover. Years of careful planning, ruined by this big mouth of mine. The only thing I can do is damage control." "Really? And what can you do?" "Yes, Lith." "What can you do?" Alina rebuked. Her right foot was furiously tapping the floor in annoyance. Lith knew he was in trouble. "I can do wind and water chore magic," he said with a low apologetic tone, while staring at his own shoes. "I'm sorry, Mom, I know you prohibited me to use any magic. But everyone else in the house always uses it, and I was so bored." The chattering increased in volume. Alina was really angry, but she could not scold him in public. Not when they were staring at them with admiration. "Nana seems really impressed. Maybe this is a turning point in Litha's life. If she takes him as her apprentice, we could have a healer in our family. I can't ruin this opportunity." So, she kept silent, wondering about his son's future. "Would you please show me?" Nana asked, smiling for the first time. "In for a penny, in for a pound. Here goes everything." Lith thought. "Breza." Lith twirled his middle and index finger 2 times, creating as many tiny whirlwinds that he used to quickly sweep the room. He pretended to lose control from time to time. His goal was to impress, not to brag or scare people out of their wits. Oh, oh, oh. Nana laughed in admiration. She could see more and more of her in the little imp. Nana too had been a precocious brat. When she was his age her talent was better, but Lith was still a sight to behold. Usually men were less talented for magic, since women with their prerogative to give birth, were naturally more in tune with the life force of the planet. Some called that world energy, others simply called it mana. Also, country boys were usually blockheads, more inclined to hard works in the fields or in the military rather than spend years on books. Now I want you to do a thing for me. You said you can conjure water, right? Lith nodded in response. Now call upon water, it does not matter how little. But then, you have to not let it fall. You must make it float, like this. A perfect sphere of water the size of a fist appeared half a meter from Nana's open hand. Lith could not comprehend the why of such a specific request, but he complied. Jorun. He conjured less than a glass worth of water, keeping its form irregular and unstable. Lith could not afford any more mistakes, his focus peaked trying to make his lack of control convincing. The water floated for 3 seconds before falling off. But instead of hitting the floor it started floating again, becoming another perfect sphere orbiting around Nana's spell like the moon does around the earth. Lith was flabbergasted. Not by Nana's control on the mana flow, he was already able of doing the same, if not better. He could not avert the eyes from the spectacle in front of him. Both spheres of water were constantly spinning on themselves, reflecting everything around them. They would capture the light from the sun, turning it into sparkles of rainbow. Lith had always seen magic like a force to be reckoned with, a great tool to build his future with. But he never thought of it as beautiful. For the first time in over 3 years he was not pretending anymore. He was simply amazed, staring at the dancing lights while the memories of his old life flooded his mind. He suddenly remembered all the hours that he spent as kid, hiding in the planetarium together with his little brother Carl. They would dream of becoming astronauts, to run away to the stars where no one would ever hurt them again. And just like that his grief returned, stronger than ever, fighting the joy out. The pain for the loss overwhelmed him, tears started streaming from his eyes. Lith, are you all right? Alina's voice woke him up from his stupor. Realizing how weak he had allowed himself to be, Lith felt deeply disgusted. Water is just water, no need to get soft over a measly light show. Soldier up and follow the plan. Lith steeled himself, sealing away all the feelings that he deemed useless. I'm done getting hurt. He thought. Yes, Mommy, I am all right. I was just moved from the old lady's magic. My name is Neria, Lith. But everyone calls me Nana. Why Nana? Nana was usually a term of endearment used for the family's grandmother. You see, when I was a young maiden, everyone called me by my name. But then time passed, and I helped so many children come into this world that they started to call me Mama. After even more time passed, those children had children of their own, and they started to call me Nana. She ruffled Litha's hair. I have a proposal for you. Now you are too little, but when you become 6 years old, instead of going to school together with those blockheads, you could come here instead. So, you could read those books as much as you want. And maybe you could learn a trade. Mine. Lith tilted his head, playing dumb. I don't know, you don't seem nice. I would like the books, though. He replied while hiding behind his mother, only half his face visible behind her legs. Alina didn't know if to laugh or cry. Her dream had come true, but Lith didn't understand what he was turning down. Please, excuse him, Nana. He is just 3 years old, he has no idea what he is saying. He doesn't even know the importance of apprenticeship. 3 years old. Nana repeated. It's almost too good to be true. But you are right, if he had to choose between gold and toys, he would probably pick the latter. We'll have this conversation again 3 years from now. She knelt down, looking Lith straight in the eyes. If you don't become dumb as all the other boys in this village, I'll take you as my apprentice. If you are still interested in magic and books, of course. Lith nodded, grabbing his mother gown, looking for protection. His weak and scared appearance hid his inner rage. 3 years? I could have as well starved by then. And all because of you, greedy hag. He was so sick of being hungry, he wanted to bite her out of frustration. Calm down, Derek, and remember all of your lessons. Suck it up and grow stronger, because only strength will make you free. Only power will keep your family safe. Chapter 13 Learning a Trade, again. Nana's work ethic didn't allow for favoritism of any kind. Lith may have been his future apprentice, but Tista had to wait for her turn like everyone else. Lith hadn't been so happy of being stuck in the queue since his student's days in college, when he would use every single second to review his weakest subjects. So much to read and so little time. Better to cram light and dark magic since they are the only elements outside the physics as I know it. In the best case scenario, it will take years to get my hands on a book again, and there is only so much I can learn as self-taught. When it came their turn, he studied carefully how the healer performed the light magic Viniri Rad Tuesday. It was the same life force detecting spell she had used on him 3 years ago, and this time he had a better understanding of magic and a way better standpoint. Being next to her, Lith could appreciate every gesture and hand movement Nana used to amplify the spell effectiveness. The light enveloped Tista's body, quickly turning gray around her chest, clearly outlining the shape of her lungs. I have good news, and I have bad news. The good news is that Tista's condition is the same as always, there is no sign of degeneration this time. The bad news is that it doesn't seem to be improving either. I'm afraid that she will remain like this forever. The more she grows, the lesser the chances that her body will be able to somehow fix itself. The air in the room turned heavy, a lifetime of illness was barely better than no life at all. Lith was so shocked to completely forget about the books. The whole world meant nothing to him if he could not share it with the only 3 people he loved and trusted. They came out of Nana's house in low spirits, returning home without speaking a word. Once arrived, Alina shared the bad news, searching for Raz's arms before starting to cry. One by one, the whole family burst into tears, hugging each other in search of comfort. Lith allowed himself to cry, cursing the cruel fate that had befallen his sister. What good is magic if I keep being helpless? Why do I keep reincarnating, simply to replace one living hell with another? Is this just bad luck or is it my fault? Could it be that in some previous life I committed such an atrocious act that now all those I love are cursed? Could this be my punishment? During the following days Lith kept second-guessing every life choice he made, before accepting the fact that bad things happens. Tista was already ill when he resurrected for the second time, it couldn't be his fault. Having been accepted as Nana's apprentice, he could now practice magic openly. Soon he proved capable of cleaning the whole house by himself, relieving his mother and sisters from all the chores. Thanks to darkness magic, cleaning dishes and cauldrons became a matter of minutes. Nothing organic, be it food residue or grease, could escape being turned into dust by a single spark of dark energy. He also made countless experiments with light magic, in search for a cure. Yet all he managed to do was keeping the symptoms at bay. Tista now needed much less treatments from Nana, but was still prisoner in her own body. This caused Orpal to hate him more and more. Show off. How I am supposed to enjoy my life with him constantly breathing on my neck. Not only Leech shares the housework with Mom, but also spends so much time with Tista. Mom and Dad always praised him for his so-called talent and intelligence. And now they never shut up about Leech saving the family a lot of money, by tending Tista's condition on his own. No one gives a damn about me wasting my time and sweat doing all the farm work. Gods, why did you let him live? Why you didn't give me any talent? Oblivious of his brother's feelings, Lith was not coping much better. His magic power and comprehension of mana kept growing, but it could not erase the perpetual taste of failure that accompanied him. In the following year he could not feel any joy regarding magic, every discovery was useless, all his power meaningless. And so, he was finally 4 years old. The period between 4 and 6 years in Lucia was called the Golden Age, since the child was big enough to have some freedom and too little to be of any help in the daily activities. They would be allowed to play all day without a care in the world. It was the perfect time to make friends and grow closer to one's own neighbors and deepen the ties between the families. The day of his 4th birthday, after he finished the chores, Eliza introduced him to all their neighbors before returning home. He was supposed to socialize and play, but Lith had other plans. There was no amount of failures or grief that could make him forget for long the hunger that consumed him since he was barely 5 months old. Raz's farm was on the western edge of Lucia's farmlands, a little less than a kilometer, 0.62 miles, apart from the great woods known as Tron. Despite the pretentious name, it wasn't particularly dangerous. The people who lived in nearby villages depended on the forest as their primary source of timber for their everyday life. Tron was also abundant in wildlife, so those bold and lucky enough would go hunting all year around, searching for precious meat, warm fur, or both. It was impossible to meet monsters in the forest, unless one went several kilometers deep. Since there was no need for exploring Tron in detail, the inner areas were still uncharted territory. There was a reason if Lith had never practiced martial arts in the New World, not even the footwork. The constant practice of magic required a lot of energy, and his household lacked the necessary resources for his training. Lith was already skinnier than all of his siblings, any more exertion and he would turn in a pile of bones. He needed food. But being a city boy, he knew nothing about butchering, he needed a teacher. And that was why he was headed for the house of Cilia Fastero, the only hunter among their neighbors. The problem is that I have no idea how to get her to help. I'm still too little for apprenticeship, and even if I wasn't, it's unlikely she had not heard about Nana's offer. She has nothing to gain helping me. I can only hope she is a kind and benevolent woman. Cilia's house was a single-story wooden house, much smaller than Litha's, about 60 square meters large. There was no henhouse or barn. Except for the space in near proximity of the house, the fields were uncultivated, full of weeds, tall grass, and whatever the wind hand planted over time. She clearly has no interest in farming and stock breeding, and that's good news. Means her business is good enough. I wonder what's in the shed near the house. It's almost as big as the house itself. Lith knocked, his innards tied in a knot from the nervousness. The door opened almost immediately. You again? Are you lost or something? Cilia was a woman in her early 30s, 1.7 meters tall, the skin tanned from the years-long exposure to the sun. Her black hair was kept short with a haircut identical to Earth's military standards. She could have been considered very cute, but the small bosom coupled with her sharp eyes and rough attitude made her manlier than most farmers. She wore a leather hunting jacket over a green shirt, green cargo pants and brown hunting boots with a soft outer sole to limit the noise made while moving. Hi Miss Fastero, I need a favor. Could you please teach me how to skin and gut animals? Cilia raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I am hungry. Not having any lever on her, Lith had decided that truth was the best policy. I have been hungry long enough to forget how being full feels. I know I can hunt, but I also know that without proper handling meat goes bad and is inedible. No, you got me wrong. I mean, why should I help you? What's in for me? Now she was knitting her eyebrows. What do you want? Lith asked while bottling up the urge to kill her slow and painfully. He was hungry enough to see her as quarry. Honestly, I don't believe a runt that barely reaches my belt can hunt anything, not even a rat. And since teaching is a waste of time, it demands compensation. She scratched her chin searching for a deal bad enough to drive the pest away. She never wanted a child of her own, let alone dealing with someone else's. So, if you want to learn from me, first you must bring here some game. If you mess up while playing butcher, you'll ruin my merchandise, wasting my goods and time. So here is my deal, whatever you bring me, I'll teach you how to skin and gut it. But half of it is mine for the trouble. Take it or leave it. So much for the kind and benevolent woman, this is plain extortion. Lith thought. I'll take it. How long will you stay home? He replied. I'll be here all day, I have a lot of work to do. Why? Because when I get back with my prey, I'll need your help. Don't forget our deal. Lith turned around, moving toward the woods. Seeing the little runt act all tough, without a bow, traps, or even just a bag for the game, Celia could not help but laugh out loud. That until the door suddenly slammed on her face, sending her butt first on the floor. After getting up, she went to the nearest window. Lith was still in the same spot, but his face was turned towards her door, his eyes glowing bright in the dim light of the dawn. After getting at the edge of the woods, he activated the light spell Life Vision. It was one of his creations from the last year of practice. By infusing his eyes with light magic, Lith was able to see living beings as colored, while the rest of the world was turned into shades of gray. The stronger the life force, the bigger and brighter was the light emitted. This way he could easily spot animals, even if they were hiding underground, in bushes or inside a tree. Lith did not need to hunt something big, as long as it was meat it was the perfect prey. Most of the animals would run away as soon he came too close, but not all of them. Birds and squirrels perched on tree branches felt safe. But Lith's spirit magic had reached a range of over 20 meters, 21.9 yards, they were all within his reach. He only needed to extend his open hand towards the quarry, then squeeze and turn it for a neck to be broken. In less than 20 minutes he had killed 2 odd feathered birds and 2 squirrels. I could catch more, but I want to pay that harpy as little as possible. While returning to the huntress house, his greed was debating fiercely with his rage. Damn it! I wish I could just ask my father. Our farm has a hen house, we eat chicken, so he must know how to butcher it. But if I do, then I will be forced to share my quarry in equal parts. And if there is something that I hate more than being robbed by that harpy is the idea of Orpal and Tryon having the same amount of meat as me. Or worse, even more, being older. I hunted this game. This meat is mine, mine. They will only be allowed to eat my scraps when and if I want so. When Lith got to the door he had calmed down, the rage hidden by his business face. He took deep breaths before knocking again. When Celia saw him, was on the verge of mocking him, calling him a quitter for giving up in less than an hour. But then Lith showed her his game, making her whole never underestimate how hard a hunter's job is. Speech die in her throat. Chapter 14 Learning a Trade, again too. How did you do it? Celia asked, still recovering from the surprise. Magic. I am blessed by the light. Didn't you hear the news? Celia started rummaging her brain, until the answer made sense. Oh. I get it now. You are the magic kid that's on everybody's mouth in Lucia. That explains a lot, including your shitty attitude. Excuse me? You found a scrawny kid on your door, asking for help. And what you did was send him away with a rip-off deal, even laughing at his efforts, and I am the one with a shitty attitude. Lith was now so angry that even the idea of sharing his prey did not seem so bad anymore. Celia laughed out loud. Kid, you really are funny in the head. First, when you come at the door of a stranger asking for help, the best you can hope for is to be sent away with a polite kick in the butt. If I had to comply with every madman's request, I would be broke in a jiffy. Second, you had the guts to slam the door at me and then come back like nothing happened. That's a shitty attitude. Listening to her point of view, Lith could only agree. For 4 years he had been a recluse, his only interactions with the family members. He had got too used getting a yes as an answer, forgetting the basic social interaction rules and even common sense. His hunger didn't help either, making him single-minded and prone to anger. Lith realized that Celia was right, and what he did that morning was just a temper tantrum. "I'm really sorry," he said earnestly, looking her in the eyes. "I have no excuses from my behavior. I would understand if you wanted to call off our deal." Celia started laughing even harder. "Hold your horses, kid. I said that you are crazy and rude, and I like that. As you so kindly pointed out, I'm a bit of jerk myself. And dog does not eat dog, our deal is still valid." She handed him a small knife with a wooden handle. "Rule number 1, bleed out the game as soon as possible. If the blood starts clotting, the meat is ruined. Make a deep incision in the neck and then hang them upside down, to make the blood drain out." She pointed him to a clothesline. "When you don't need the fur, I always cut off the head directly, makes things faster." Lith put down the knife and conjured water, making it coat his whole hand. Then he froze it, turning it into a razor-sharp blade, cutting off the bird's head, using the knife only for the squirrels. Celia whistled with approval. "Nice trick. You don't shy away from blood, don't you? As I have told you before, I am hungry. Too hungry to care about big round eyes or a warm fur, I only see them as food." Celia gave him thumbs up. "That's the right attitude for a hunter." Then she took the animals and hanged them, thinking the clothesline was too high for Lith to reach. Lith did not feel the need to correct her. "Since we are building a master-apprentice relationship and all that Cr*P, mind you telling why come to me instead of your father or mother. I don't know your family, but this is something that any farmer knows how to do. It would be too expensive having someone else butcher your livestock." "Indeed." Lith concurred, pondering how to answer. He looked her straight in the eyes before asking. "Juts between us, master-apprentice secret and all that Cr*P." Celia nodded, surprised receiving an actual answer instead of a cranky remark. "As far as I can remember, me and my brothers never had a good relationship. Things are pretty bad, especially with my older brother." Lith decided that he needed to take that load off his chest. Talking to a stranger was the best way to relieve his stress and ruin Orpal's reputation. Truth was indeed the best policy. "I do not know if it's because of my magic, but I always ate a lot. That would not be a big deal if I hadn't 4 siblings, one of which has a congenital condition. Her treatments cost quite a lot, and that is barely necessary to keep her house-ridden. Thank the gods I'm an only child." "But what does that have to do with your older brother?" Lith pretended to not have heard her. "This means that despite my parents' hard work, we don't have much food on the table." Lith pointed at his thin arm, to make her feel guilt. "And my brother is a growing boy too, so he would like to have much more chow than he actually has. From time to time, especially during winter, he had fits of rage, where he would accuse me of everything that goes wrong in his life. He often said things like, 'Why the heck did you have so many children if you cannot properly feed them? Why does he have to get almost as much as food as me? He does nothing, while I work my ass in the fields all year around. This is not my brother, this is a leech that is sucking my life away. I wish you died that cursed day.'" Lith did his best Orpal impression. "Are you making this up to make me feel guilty, kid? Because that's sick." Celia was knitting her eyebrows, doubting someone could say such things to his little brother. Lith shook his head, sighing. "I wish. Did your father give him a good beating? Maybe that could help him come to his senses." Lith shook his head again. "No. This started when I was still very little, and even when my father resorted to spanking, it only made things worse. To the point that I now sleep in the girls' room." Celia bit her lips, to avoid making a sex joke. "Too soon. Too soon for what? Nothing. Please continue. That was until a year ago. Then I started practicing magic, and soon I was skilled enough to do almost all house chores by myself. Sometimes I help with the livestock too. I even managed to keep my sister's condition under control. Lith took a deep breath before finding the strength to add most of the times. Then everything should be good now, right? Wrong. The house needs repairs, and so does the barn and most of the working tools. If you also take in consideration all the random sh*t that happens and takes priority, I don't see our situation getting any better soon, and neither does my brother. Now he can't put the blame on me anymore, so the last time he took it out on my ill sister, saying things that I refuse to repeat out loud. Lith spat on the ground to get rid of the dirty taste the memory gave him. To the point of saying that it would be better for her to. Lith pointed at the hanged game. To put her down like an animal? Kid, we may be jerks, but your brother is a lunatic. Lith gritted his teeth, remembering Orpal's exact words. It would be much better for her, for all of us. She can't run, she can't work. Tista will never be able to make friends, fall in love or have children of her own. She is bound to be a burden for the family. And what will happen when you guys are no more? Who will take care of her? Eliza? Or maybe the little leech wonder? Lith could still vividly recall his mother crying from those cruel words. Eliza and Tista running into her arms. Raz beating Orpal so hard he could not walk for days. Indeed. He replied to Celia with a growl. And that's is why I despise him and don't want him to touch a single bite of my game. I get it. I don't even know him and already hate that guy's guts too. No, I don't hate him. Lith corrected her. Hate, just like love, is an irrational feeling, while my contempt for him has sound foundations. Wow. Such profound notion for someone so young. Worthy of a hunter. Now enough chit-chat, it's time to get to work. Celia took down the squirrels, passing one to Lith. We will start with the little critters. They are smaller and better for practice, since even if you mess up is no big deal, there is not much meat in here. She placed a squirrel on a cutting board, and prepared another for Lith. What I am going to teach you stands for most rodents, but just in case, if you ever find a rabbit that still has a snow-white fur, bring it to me. It is valuable only until it starts turning brown for the spring. Even a tiny mistake can ruin the fur, lowering its value. Celia handed him the short knife again. If you want me to teach you properly, let's do things my way. Use the knife, do as I do and follow my instructions. Lith nodded in approval. On the squirrel's back, pinch its hide and cut it near the base of the neck so to expose at least half of it. Now use your index finger and middle finger on both hands to create an opening after you have made the cut. Use your fingers to hook up under the skin and pull one hand towards the rear and the other hand towards its head. During the process, Lith noticed that beside being disgusting, skinning a squirrel was like taking off a sticky wet glove. After that, Celia showed him how to remove the head, the legs and the tail. I know is a bummer, but that bushy tail is no fur, is all goddamn body hair. You can still use it to stuff things, is very warm and soft. Now comes the tricky part. When we proceed to gut anything, be careful while making incisions. If you cut open the bladder or the intestines, the meat is ruined by bile or feces. There is no saving it. This stands for all the animals, so pay attention, kid. Gutting the squirrel was bloody and gruesome, but Lith could already smell the meat at the end of the tunnel, so he barely felt any discomfort. When they finished, Celia put both squirrels on a skewer, to roast them in her fireplace. While we wait for our morning snack, I'll show you how to scald a bird for the plucking. As the name implies, water must not be too hot or cold, just enough for you to immerse a finger without getting a burn, but unable to hold the finger in for more than a second without burning yourself. That's proper scalding temperature. Celia took a big cauldron, positioning it over a campfire she had always ready on the back of her house. It can be a messy job, so it's better to do it outside whenever is possible. The smell of the meat cooking inside was making Litha's mouth watery. He could not afford the risk of them burning. Jorun. At his command the cauldron became immediately filled with water. Lith then stuck his hand in the water casting infero, making it emit steam. Celia whistled again with approval. Fast and efficient. I'm starting to regret this master-apprentice stuff less and less. I now understand why that old hag of Neria called dibs on you. We should be ready to go, but first. Celia went inside briefly, returning with 2 little plates of roasted squirrel. Before she could even pass him his plate, Lith had already snatched the food, wolfing it down like there was no tomorrow. He sucked and gnawed until only bones were left. After licking every single of his fingers, he returned to his previous calm and composed demeanor. Good gods, such a gentleman. Celia's voice was oozing sarcasm. Would you like another serving? Because that seriously creeped me out and I know a thing or two about. Her mockery fell on deaf ears. Litha's eyes could only see the second squirrel closing in. As soon as Celia pretended to offer him her share, his hands were already moving. After devouring the last squirrel, Lith noticed that Celia was frozen in place. Her mouth was open but no words were coming out of it, the plate still near his face. He gently put the bones back into the plate. There was no need to hold the plate for me, but thanks. That was very kind of you. Part 1 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.